deserve. Our last panel of the day is Diaspora Youth, Social Media, and Activism, and it is being moderated by Odeh Tuma. She is the newly elected ADC San Diego chapter president. So, Odeh, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending and for being patient, sticking with us into this afternoon. Our panel, as Chris mentioned, is on diaspora youth, social media, and the activism that ensues with social media. Before we start, I would again like to reiterate a land acknowledgement. So we, as occupiers and settlers on this land, recognize and respect the indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of the land. Specifically, we recognize the Chumash, Tongva, Kish, and Tataviam nations and people whose ancestral homelands we currently inhabit and occupy. We extend our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people who are still present, exist, and have lived on and cared for this land since time immemorial. Before we start off with this panel, I would like to just, before I introduce my panelists, I would love to just share the definition of the word diaspora. So a diaspora is a scattered population whose origin lies in a separate geographic locale. Historically, the word diaspora was used to refer to the mass dispersion of a population from its indigenous territories. So introducing my panelists, first on my right is Emel Amir. Emel uses they, them pronouns. They are a transdisciplinary artist, writer, and facilitator of Swana descent, currently based in California. Their work explores the tensions between rootedness and movement in diaspora, weaving together magic, spirituality, desire, displacement, state violence. Their work colorfully transcends gender and media boundaries. They have shown across the web and have performed or shown work at USC Roski and Lemon Space in Los Angeles. Their work has been featured in Reconstructed Magazine, Salon al-Mahshar, Zafaran, Mill World, Them, XYZ, and AWID Magazine. And on the podcast, they host Diaspora Babes. They have recently been an artist at the Wasaic Project in New York and Hatch Workshop in California. They graduated with a BA from Williams College in 2017. Find them at emelamir.com and on Instagram at YouCanDoItHabibi. So on Emel's right is Lujane Bagad. Lujane is an art historian, artist, and curator based in Los Angeles, California. She recently graduated with her master's in curatorial practices and the public sphere from the University of Southern California, where she is completing her graduate thesis on contemporary artists in Saudi Arabia. Bagad currently works as an artist assistant in Sharon Guirgui's studio and has worked as a curatorial assistant in Lyman Space, a curatorial intern at the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum, and an intern in education at the California African American Museum, CAAM. She co-curated Not Your Family WhatsApp, a project that centers around WhatsApp as a digital platform that allows for global communication. Not Your Family WhatsApp explores the connectivity of the platform and the way we communicate in the diaspora. In her free time, she is a member of Swana LA, a collective dedicated to advocating for the Southwest Asian and North African community on a local and global scale. She received her BA in art history with a minor in art from Florida International University. Gigi Ali unfortunately could not be with us today. Yasmin Qasim on Lujane's right. Yasmin Qasim's art focuses on the precariousness within the layers of identity and what it is to be Egyptian, American, Muslim, and queer. Born and raised in central Indiana, she received her BFA in sculpture from Heron School of Art and Design at IUPUI in 2015. She went on to receive her MFA in visual arts at the University of California, San Diego in 2019. Qasim completed a residency at the 1805 Gallery in San Diego in 2019, accompanied by a solo show, Every Fragment, a Prayer. Summer of 2019, she participated in Happening 2018 in Tijuana. In Tijuana, Mexico in 2018. Qasim's solo exhibition, Jihad of Bitter Petals, was installed at the University of California, San Diego in April in 2019. Recently, she was artist in residence with Bread and Soul Gallery in San Diego and participated in Visions and Nightmares at Simone Subal Gallery, New York. And we will sing in the Tall Grass again at the Front Art and Cultura Center in San Isidro, California. Last but not least, all the way on the right, Skyland De La Rice. Skyland De La Rice is an Iraqi Jewish American who recently graduated from Reed College, where he wrote his senior thesis about Arab Jewish experiences in the United States, titled Farewell, Forget, Remember, Arab Jewish Identity in America. His thesis explores the dichotomization of Arabs and Jews as it has been constructed in the United States, and how such a construction has impacted his own generation of Arab American Jews. He is now making a film exploring the same themes focused on his family, in particular his mother's artistic career and her relationship with her parents. So our panel is going to be a little bit different. We're just going to go straight into a Q&A style. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end and we'll open it up to the audience. So to all the panelists, how have you made an effort to connect with your homeland and culture while in diaspora? Emma, would you like to go first?
Sure. So in my bio, it said Swana. It didn't actually say where my peoples are from. My father is a Yemeni immigrant to this country. My mother was born in San Francisco, and she's Lebanese and like white American. So I like really identify with like the interconnections and exchanges that happen across the region, and especially the cross-pollination that happens in diaspora. And I really feel like there's so much learning that happens through listening to others share their experiences. Growing up in Stockton, California is technically one of the most diverse cities in the US, which, you know, you can question some of the metrics that are used to like create that statistic, but basically that means there's a lot of displaced people from all across the world, like kind of growing up there and with not much experience of like what other parts of the world might look like. It's kind of like, oh, we woke up here and this is just what we're doing because you have to work really hard, and like you better work really hard or you're going to suffer kind of thing. And so by watching like my peers find ways of connecting to their culture and also feeling disconnected, I feel like that has helped me just feel better about validating the things that I was raised with, and instead of being like, oh, I don't know, being like, actually there are things I know, and this is just as much part of the experience of being like Yemeni and in diaspora, or Lebanese and in diaspora, and like sitting with the feelings of grief about what I don't know. I hope that that's just like a good setup for that, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Saudi Arabia, so I have a different Arab American experience. So when I came here to America, even though I'm American, it was still like, I'm Arab American, but having to culture shock and like assimilate into like, you know, oh, we don't fight over paying the bill, like type of thing. And it's just kind of that. And in the art world, which I'm like a curator, as you mentioned, like I'm trying to make spaces for like our people and our experiences and stories and showcase and support artists that don't usually have that experience of being exposed or like written about. And I think there is like a lack, because the art world is unfortunately very white and male, and that's the art history, that's what gets shown. So I'm just there trying to like my best to facilitate that and show that and archive that. So that's my part.
I think using social media to connect to the diaspora was actually like a lifeline for me, because I grew up incredibly isolated from Swana and from the diaspora of Swana in central Indiana, and being, you know, very young when 9/11 happened increased that isolation, because suddenly it was shameful and something that I had to worry about depending on which setting I was in, who I was around. I couldn't disclose certain things about myself. And so as I got older, I realized that, my dad and my family in Egypt that I connect to once a month through Yahoo Messenger at the time was not enough. I wanted to have peers that I could relate to because, my father at that point in his life, had spent most of his time in Egypt, and he couldn't relate to an adolescent growing up in America with the identity that I had. And so, using different social media sites like Tumblr and Instagram to actively find, first, it kind of starts out with finding like meme pages, things you can laugh at and say, reflect in, but then eventually finding other people. Like I met Amal online, and I met Lujain the same way through a mutual friend, and honestly, just seeing that they exist validates my experience, and it's just that simple because I grew up in so much isolation. So social media has been really important in a sense of validation.
I think for me, since the Jewish Arab history and Jewish Arab existence really has been overall suppressed and erased, for me, reconnecting to that heritage has been a process of relearning and resurfacing that history. And I think the main way I've done that is by really just learning what it is to be Arab or be Iraqi through connecting with a greater Arab community or Arab American community, and just understanding what that means, and just trying to learn about the history of Jewish Arabs, and trying to recreate in a way the world that has been erased and this existence that has been erased, and doing so by developing relationships with the greater Arab American community and greater Arab community, and that way reconnecting with this heritage which has been suppressed, and not only by Zionism and Arab nationalism and these nationalist identities, but also through assimilationist forces in the U.S. and the way my grandparents, for instance, made a choice to not teach my mom Arabic and not to teach my mom and her siblings about our history. And so for me to reconnect to that, I've had to do a lot of learning on my own.
I want to just jump back into about the question you specifically referred to, homeland and heritage. And I feel like homeland is very specific. It's not necessarily culture, it's not specifically at language or identity. And I truly believe that connecting to my family, my father grew up farming actually, and that was what my family did for generations and generations in a small village between Aden and Taz in southern Yemen. And there's something about the lack of connection to land that is something that we're as colonized people and on and on stolen land, there's something about this connection from plants and from growing and from death. And so I really strive to learn about the trees in my family's village and the crops, and to connect to gardening here. So as an artist and as someone who cares, makes food for people and for myself, there's something very much about connecting to the physicality of the world that I feel can't be divorced from all of these conversations about emotional validation, about not feeling connected. And because we can't feel connected when we are disconnected from the things that make us here. And we carry our homelands in our bones because of because of all of the stuff in our marrow, so yeah.
I absolutely agree with that. Do you feel a responsibility towards your heritage, culture, country of origin, even if you were not born there? And what does that responsibility look like to you, and how have you exercised it? You want to start at the other end, Skyland?
Can you say the question again?
Do you feel a responsibility towards your heritage or your culture, your country, even if you were not born there? And then what does that responsibility look like to you, and how have you exercised it?
Yeah, I think for me, since I'm probably going to be the last generation to have known the Arab Jewish immigrant generation, to have known my grandparents were probably the last people to have known Iraq and known that world, I feel kind of an obligation to tell that story, since my kids or the next generation will not have a direct connection to that, will not have heard those stories. So I think I have always felt a responsibility to learn about it and to yeah, to, as I said before, kind of recreate that world through these stories. Through, like, for me, it's been, I like wrote a thesis, like a kind of academic piece about Arab American identity in the U.S., but also overall in the diaspora. And then now I'm making a film that's telling my specific family story. And yeah, I think that is really related to the fact that I feel like that story is going to be erased, and there won't be people who have heard it directly from the immigrant generation.
Yeah, I think I identify with that a little bit because my dad is the only one of his family that has immigrated to the U.S., and my mom is actually from the United States, so we did not grow up speaking Arabic in the house either. And it's something that I've had to actively teach myself how to do, and it's a slow, ongoing struggle, so forgive me if I don't pronounce things right or quite understand. But I feel an obligation to knowing my family's story, but then I also don't feel like I need to live or carry on specific traditions that my dad left his country so that I would not have to have those things. And I feel like after struggling with it for a long time, because for a long time it was like, I don't feel like I deserve to call myself Egyptian because I've grown up so isolated. And it's been a slow, ongoing thing of reclaiming and connecting and making that effort, because no one is going to hand me that identity, even though I am. I've found it sort of like this duality of, you know, learning about my family, learning about where we come from, learning about the greater cultural traits, but then also creating my own, because I am growing up in a unique situation. I'm not growing up in Egypt. I'm not growing up in Said. Like, I am here with deep Midwestern influences now transplanted in Southern California. And so that just adds to the story. And part of my art practice is making artwork about that story and those layers of identity, because I'm not the only one like me. A lot of youths, if you will, identify similarly with my story and in the layers of identity and the conflicts that come from that. And I think, like, being queer is a bit of a friction point in some of those instances. And so I also feel a responsibility to those who I consider my peers and those who are going to come after me to record my story as well.
Yeah, I think, like, it's my responsibility and honor to, like, have artists that, like, I care about and write about their works, because no one else is writing about our stories, and no one else is like where Skyland is, like, archiving and writing and, like, showing their family story. It's, like, so important for us to go into as a community. So, like, knowing Yasmin and knowing Ahmed and, like, Skyland and, like, just, like, supporting one another is, like, what we need to do. We don't exist alone, even though we're all from different places. Like, on this panel, like, each of us, our heritage are from different places, but we are all in community and we're all together. So I think that is not just, like, a responsibility, it's, like, also, like, a pleasure, to be honest, to me personally. So thank you all.
I think it's beautiful. My kind of initial thought was separating responsibility out from shame or obligation, because I feel like there's a lot of that passed on to us. And that was passed on because it was passed on to our caregivers, and because we're not taught that, like, structural issues are responsible for so much of our suffering. Instead, it becomes, you're the shame, it's your fault, when we are able to disconnect or when we're displaced or something like that. I feel like we carry so much personal shame that can get in the way of actually connecting to those we love. And that's something that, like, I personally really strive to transform, like, in my art practice and in my personal relationships and in my politics. I will say, because I've been born here, I feel like everyone who has structural access and privilege does have the responsibility to listen to those who have been marginalized by that. So like as a US citizen, I really like value a practice of kind of decentering US-centric beliefs and worldviews, and listening to fellow Yemeni Yemeni asylum seekers and migrants and those who've been displaced, and yeah, recognizing and just listening and learning how to decenter my own experience in appropriate situations. And I can do that because of, like, in other circumstances, like, I know how to validate myself. So I feel like that's a big part of it.
Thank you. Next, so personally, I feel a simultaneous in-betweenness, but also a disconnect between my Palestinian culture that was, taught to me at home, but also the culture that I was raised in the United States. Have you experienced this, and how has it influenced you? And then also, how do you feel about being, quote unquote, enough for each of those cultures, and then being questioned over your identity?
This is like a really big question for me. So I have grown up never feeling like I was enough. I felt rejection sort of on both sides, if you will. And it was harder for me, I think, to like ignore my like Egyptian roots and identity and name and likeness than my siblings, because my siblings are all very, very white passing, because they all take after my mom, and I'm the only one that looks like my dad. And so I was othered immediately, people coming on the street and asking me, where are you from? Where are you from? Guessing, trying to guess where I come from, because where I was living, not many people look like me, so I would stand out like a sore thumb. And so I really wore, instead of feeling like an outcast, which I kind of did, I would wear that as a badge of honor that like made me feel so much closer to my Egyptian identity. But then spending time in Egypt, especially as a young adult, I felt I don't know if I can fit in here. Like, this is so much for me to deal with, and so different than what I expected and what I had thought it would be. And, it's this sort of identity crisis after identity crisis. And spending a lot of time studying and speaking and making artwork, especially about this identity, became a way to sort of dig roots in for myself when I felt like I was sort of a tumbleweed moving from place to place. And then realizing that I was queer was really wonderful, because it finally made everything make sense. But then at the same time, I felt like this might also, in some people's eyes, invalidate me from being Egyptian or being Arab, which they don't have the power to do, but I'm struggling with imposter syndrome. And so any sort of negative or naysaying makes me feel like I'm not enough. And so my practice is making artwork again about my life and my experience, both as a way to advocate that people like me exist, but also serving myself as a reminder, like, yes, you are these things, and you can be these things, and you can occupy this space. And it's something that we were talking about earlier, but it serves as like a magnet to like affirm that I am who I am, and I am allowed to be all these things, and also in hopes to attract other people like me, or to attract myself to those other people. So it is a struggle, and it's there constantly. It's not like I've solved my problems, but it's a practice, if you will. It's something I have to continue working towards and building for myself, because the imposter up here is the hardest to beat.
Yeah, I mean, I relate a lot to that too in some ways, because I'm a mixed kid, so it's always the glass is half full type of thing, but I'm just like, I'm hydrating, so like it doesn't matter what you think, I am still those identities, and no one can take that away from me. So what is enough to begin with, and who is having those standards. So if I'm enough and I like identify as those things, and because I am and I have that power, no one else's like validation means that to me other than myself, because no one can take that away from me. No one can be like, oh, you're not Cuban enough, or you're not Arab enough, or you're not this enough. And I'm just like, well, I am, so, you know, deal with it.
Yeah, I think that part, I'm here, this is what it is, and it's great. It's great, actually, and I think that coming to that process of, instead of internalizing like the not enoughness of I'm not this or I'm not that or I'm in between, recognizing that we have a creation process. Like as artists, as writers, as people, as birth givers, like as people who raise children or tend earth, we have the power to create things, and we are creating our cultures, we are creating each other and ourselves, and I see identity and I see heritage as something that is living, that is something that is ongoing. It is not something that is stagnant, that exists outside of us that we can never reach. It is something that we are making. And we've forgotten how to make things sometimes and how to tend life and how to let go. But that is indigenous ways of knowing that we're in the process of like reclaiming, right? And that does not happen, it does not happen alone. I think it's so beautiful to go inside and to learn from that, but I learned how to hold space for transformation and for creation by watching other trans and queer folks of color in diaspora, like the love we hold for each other to just be themselves, to create. Like we do that for each other in a way that you see people blossom because they are reflected with love. And that's something that I see happen in the world. I see that happen in relationships and friendships, in communities, in clubs, like in dance spaces. And that's something that I'm like, that is a tool for healing and liberation. And I bring that both into my facilitation and my teaching practice as well as my personal practice. So yes, if we're listening to the outside structures, yeah, it's never enough. But if we meet each other with respect for who we are and what we come from and what we can be, there's like a nurturing that happens there.
Yeah, I agree. I really identify with that idea of creating to feel enough. I think because existing ideas of Jewishness and Arabness leave out and exclude the Arab Jew or the Jewish Arab, there's been like a new movement, a new generation of Arab Jews, and especially in the United States, who have realized that we have to create our own idea of it and create our own idea of Arabness and Jewishness that will include us. Because for me, like that, I think that disconnect and in-betweenness has been really fundamental in the way I've lived my life and experienced things, because the idea of Jewishness that I've been told and it had nothing to do with my family and like the way we grew up or I grew up. And so that like was always a huge disconnect for me, and it's taken me a long time to accept that I can be both and that I do exist and there are people like me, and that has been a process of creation.
I really resonate with that. I like that statement, like I can be both. We can be whatever we want to be. So kind of transitioning now more to social media. Has social media allowed you to connect to your heritage? And if yes, how so? And then in what ways do you honor your heritage through your work and your social media presence?
I think this is a good question. So Odeh, I've felt more connected to Iraq, like present contemporary Iraq, is through finding that there's like a lot of nostalgia for the Jewish community there, and finding specifically that there's like social media accounts and websites about my great uncle, who was the head of the Communist Party in Iraq, and how there's a lot of like in Iraq, within the Arab world, there are people who like see him as like a martyr or see him as like a really important figure in Iraqi history. And so that has made me personally feel connected to this place that I've never known directly.
I've been using social media to communicate with my family since like 2008. through Facebook Messenger, and sometimes they call at like 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm sleeping, and I get a lot of friend requests, people saying I'm your cousin, but I don't recognize their name. I have to look at, okay, who are mutual friends, and if it's the right people, then I know they're telling the truth. Because sometimes it's like my cousin's best friend is like, I'm your cousin. I'm like, but you're not really my cousin. But it's always been really fun because it's like I finally have access to like family that are like my age, and we can talk about like the things we have in common, like pop culture. And like my one cousin, he is obsessed with the TV show Scrubs, and like that's his favorite thing in the world, and we'll talk about it all the time, and we'll share recipes with each other, and it's casual. And not only did I grow up isolated from my Egyptian family, but I also grew up isolated from my American family. So I only grew up with my brothers and my sister and my parents, and I didn't have cousins around me. So it's really refreshing to be able to just randomly text each other and, share funny things or check in. And that's expanded, especially over Instagram, especially on meme accounts, because now that I've moved away from home, I'm very close with my dad. And so he and I we won't like text each other. We might call each other a few times a week to talk, but we'll just send each other funny videos or pictures back and forth. And that's really nice to be able to do that with him, especially because it's just another way for us to connect. And sort of like relate to something that we hadn't really been able to relate to before.
I want to hear about Not Your Family's WhatsApp.
I was gonna get there. So Not Your Family's WhatsApp is an exhibition that I co-curated with Zainab Al-Taji, and we have a website, notyourfamily'swhatsapp.com. We have a window display at Coaxial Art Foundation until October 10th, which you can like go and see. But everything is on the website. Well, we're gonna have so we had a talk series that's gonna be on there soon, but we had a bunch of different things to like explore digital communication. So we had archiving and art, diaspora, futurism, and mental health. So it's just kind of exploring not just WhatsApp, but digital communication in general, and how we use that as a way of connection. And like personally, when my WhatsApp is down, my biggest thing is I want to go on my family group and have that connection to all my family that's scattered around. And like I feel like everybody can relate to that in some sort of way, where you want to like have those like sparkly good morning memes, or and like know that your mom is doing okay, or she says good night. And it's just that connection to have family or chosen and biological family in that relation. So it's not just the WhatsApp itself that we're exploring, but like digital communication, which includes a lot of the time social media, and that how it's being used. So we just really explore that. And we also have like artwork that a lot of talented artists, including Ahmed, who is both on the panel and in the show itself, and so check it out if you want, notyourfamily'swhatsapp.com, just in case you haven't got it. But yeah, you go.
Yeah, so growing up in Stockton again, which is in the Central Valley of California, I did a lot of work organizing with went volunteering for organizations with ISNA and CARE and Islamic Relief and all of the MSUs. Like while I was in high school, I was at the San Joaquin Delta College and involved in the MSU there. And that was before I kind of came into like my queerness and my transness and all of that. And it was kind of working from a place of the women do a lot of the work and then the men are on stage kind of thing. And I was slowly pushed out of these organizing spaces like through high school and college, even though that was, again, being raised in the post 9/11 thing where you have to be a model minority and you have to do really well in school and you have to be very articulate and communicate so these people won't kill us kind of thing. But I was pushed out of that world by both sexism, by like queerphobia, by a bunch of different things. Earlier in the women's panel, they talked about the women leading a khutbah or leading prayer and stuff like that. And at my college, at Williams College, we had a whole drama with the Muslim chaplain because he absolutely refused to let like anyone who wasn't like a Sunni cis man speak during Jummah, like, and he had all sorts of fragility around that. And I was just so pushed out of these spaces and burnt out, and that's an experience I've seen reflected in so many of like my colleagues who try to organize with masjids and things like that. And I'm hoping things change. I wouldn't know because I've been so burnt out, and I found other spaces that actually welcome me. And I'm in the process of creating those spaces, and social media has been a fundamental like tool for that. Because like, especially for other queer and trans, like Muslim folks or Swana folks and Arab folks and South Asian folks who resonate, like, we're scattered around the world. After I graduated, I was in France for several years, but that was when I found my community in the US and across, like, transnationally, was through social media. So that when I came back to California, there were folks I knew, and every time I go to a new city, there's people I know that I'm connected to. There's job opportunities and shows that I get in different cities, like in Chicago or London, or like LA before I'm even there because of social media. And there's something that's so like emotionally rich to be able to connect to people who aren't physically there. And I like to remember too that that's not like necessarily a new tool. That like the way that my people like farmed was through watching the stars. Right? We know how to guide ourselves from people who are far away or from stories that are far away because we talked about stars like they were people, like Orion was Al-Joza and this was a woman in a village and this and that. You know what I'm saying? Like we know how to connect to people and to ideas and our concepts that are not like physically with us, and I feel like remembering that that is a practice, something that I've also learned through social media and through people who do this work and share this work like online, is just there's so much richness there. There's so much richness that we've been disconnected to, but is there for us. Yeah.
So going off of that idea, do y'all believe social media is evolving into a grassroots platform for activism, and specifically for intersectional activism? And have you used it as such, and how has that impacted your causes?
Just to finish up that thought that I had, I think that it was there. I feel like it's a space that's being super colonized by corporations, and that I'm not sure what's going to be coming next and what's going to be broken down in the next couple of years with net neutrality. It has very much been a tool for that. I spend a lot less time on Instagram now, though, just because it feels so uncomfortable and it feels so like exploitative and fascist kind of like. It's the thing that surveillance. So yes, let's see where it's going.
Yeah, I think we always use the tools that we have, you know, so I think during all the revolutions, the quote-unquote Arab Spring, like people would use WhatsApp, and now WhatsApp is not a thing that is used as often anymore because it's not as encrypted, because it's owned by Mark Zuckerberg, which also owns Instagram and Facebook, obviously, and all these like things get surveilled, and then we just keep going, hopping from different platforms, Signal to this, to that, to GroupMe, you know, and it's just gonna keep evolving, but we're always gonna find a way to use the tools that we have and need, and you know, we've always used these tools. So when you were talking about like community and having that community through different cities and whatever, you know, our Babas, when they came here, they didn't know anyone, and like so-and-so knows so-and-so, and like we're like Arab, so we're always gonna be like, oh, bint khaltik knows bint, so we're always gonna find a way. And I think the same thing goes for social media, but we're kind of almost doing it ourselves and removing the other person from like having to make those connections. But we're always gonna have community, we're always gonna find ways for activism and organizing, and using the tools that we have is just the smartest way to go. So, you know, we don't have to send birds anymore, which would be a whole different thing. And if you hear one of our talks, we talk about that, because you need to have special visas to send birds to fly. So, you know, just sending the message through the DM is easier, or email. So
it's much easier, but it's getting censored now these days, which is another huge issue. Yasmin, Skyland?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with what Amel and Lushain has said. I think that it is useful in getting information that is not put together in the way that mainstream media does. As earlier, those of us who sat in on the writing panel during lunch, there was much discussion about how certain topics are talked about in a very particular way, and social media sort of allows a way around that through more sharing information with your circle, and kind of like what Lujane was saying, where you have a friend who's a friend of a friend, and they're getting all this really great information. And I think with that, though, there's also the cautionary of knowing, you have to also kind of look at who's sharing the information, and you have to kind of give them a quick read through the profile or the other things that they're reading to make sure that this is okay, can I trust this source? Can I trust the information that they're giving me, and where are they getting their information? And I found, especially through the summer, with much that was happening around the events occurring in Palestine, that there was a lot of different information coming through, and I'd often try and find the sources that were primary. And it wasn't too hard to find a primary source of what was happening, because people living there are sharing videos, they are talking. And I think that's absolutely a plus. The downside of that is the algorithm censors people out. It looks for certain things. So you do see people having to speak in sort of a code or share things in a different way, or great sources that were once there have been pushed out, and you have to then try to find them again and go through that hunt again. So it's a cycle.
Yeah, social media has been pretty much the sole way I've been connected to other progressive Jewish Arabs and learned what the main issues are and what people care about, and then also connected to just other Arab Americans, politically engaged Arab Americans. Yeah, and I think for me, there's a group of Arab Jews that have a listserv, and so I connected to that through Facebook, just looking people up, Arab, Jewish, American, Iraqi Jew, and just finding people and messaging them, and then being connected to other people and other people and other people. Yeah.
I think it's a pretty common theme that we all crave connections, and then we're active about actually finding them and creating them. So I think that's really beautiful. And along that theme, as we, the younger generation, are slowly being passed the torch by the older generation, what do you want them to know?
What torch? I didn't get a torch.
The metaphorical torch. The responsibility, if you will.
I would say, let us tell you who we are. Let your kids tell you who they are. And when they say something that contradicts maybe some view of the world you have, or challenges some part of yourself, recognize that that's not personal. It's not a sign of your failing. It's not a sign that you're irrelevant, or that the child is wrong. But there's a lot that is coming up from us, and we just want to be accepted and loved in community. And in doing that, we can create a lot of things together, because liberation will be intergenerational, it will be collective, and we have things that we can learn from each other. So just let us be who we are.
Oh, we love you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a lot of respect for all generations, and a lot to learn and honor from our ancestors, and from the ancestors, including the older generation. And they have a lot to learn from us too. And I think mutually, Emin was saying, that we work together and have a lot of love and respect, and agree to disagree sometimes, but also learn from each other and honor each other. And as long as there's respect and love, then we work together, and we can hopefully, inshallah, be free. That's how we work together. That's a torch.
No one's free till we're all free.
I would say just simply that we're ready. We're ready to take on the responsibility. We've already been holding responsibility on our shoulders for a long time, in that we are actively building on and building up the collective space that we hold together as a Swana community. We are actively engaged in conversations with each other, whether they be really big formal conversations like this conference, or just interpersonal conversations that we have online, or even through memes that we share with each other. But we're ready to take the torch and to carry it with you as well.
Yeah, just an appreciation for the older generations. Like my ability to reclaim my Arabness is entirely due to the work the generations before me have done.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And just trust that you've done good enough. And if you feel bad, it's not our fault. Like, you're good. Thank you so much for what you've done.
On that note, thank you to all the panelists. We would love to take questions from all of y'all if you have any. Yes. I think Chris is going to come around with a microphone.
Hi, my name's Katya. I live in Los Angeles with my sister Jana, and we're Lebanese American Muslim. And sorry, I'm going to try to ask this without crying. But, so my sister is bisexual, and her struggle with her identity to be Arab and Muslim has led to a really dark mental health space. And so the question's for Yasmin and Amma, like, how have you navigated that space? Because she doesn't believe that she can be Lebanese, Muslim, bisexual at the same time, because her family has basically told her that she can't. And so I'm just wondering, like, how you've navigated that.
My heart goes out to you and your sister, and it sounds like you're very supportive, and know that that means the world to her, because it's very frightening. It's very scary. It's not easy. And the fact that she is still struggling with it, at least relating that to my experience, means that she wants to hold them all. And my simple answer is, you can. We have always been here. There have always been queer Arab Muslims. My path through feeling affirmed in my identity as a queer Arab Muslim with the right to be so, even defeating my own imposter syndrome in my head, has been through mourning, has been through healing, has been through turning to history. The two pieces out there are my pieces, and they're about the stories in Alf Layla wa Layla that feature queer characters, and reading something that has been compiled over 100 years ago that puts the marriage of two women together and their sincere, loving relationship alongside one of them praying every night until morning is like, wow, that was something that was read, that was a story that was told. How many people have heard that? How many people existed in that same circumstance enough for it to be written down, for both Islam, for both queerness, to be written and recorded, not just in that one story, but countless stories in Alf Layla wa Layla. And that's not the only text that exists that shows these relationships together. I've had to do a lot of research into history. I've also had to do a lot of soul searching. And I base a lot of my practice of Islam on compassion and love, sincerity and justice, and I don't see how my identity as a queer woman, the love that I have for my partner, my relationship, and where I want to go with it, conflicting with that. And I think that what helps is to have a strong support network, and to be affirming, and to see yourself represented not just in the present, but also in the past, so that you can imagine your future.
Thank you so much, Katya, for sharing, and about your sister Jenna. My heart goes out to you, and thank you for being a supportive family member, a blood family member, and being there with her through her struggle, because everyone is going to walk through their own struggles, and sometimes it's so hard because you wish you could like take something from, take someone's struggles from a person, but you can't. You can just walk that path with them, as long as they're willing to walk it, you know? And I've had like my journeys and stuff like that, and my journey is gonna look really different from your sister's. And I think the big thing is just letting her know, helping her understand that she's not alone, that she has community, and she is not a problem. And there's a lot of people out there who are who are willing to stand with her. And it feels like, I know it can feel like it's not that way, but it is. And I genuinely hope that like she receives the connection she needs. For me, it was like listening to the language of my body. I was made a certain way, and there's a lot getting in the way of like me connecting to who I am, but I don't have to think about how can I hold this and how can I hold that and how can I be that when this is that, because it just is like, it just is right here. Like I'm telling you that it can happen because it is happening right here. Like, and so being able to, again, like, listen non-judgmentally and recognize, like, okay, I'm holding stuff that belongs to other people and this isn't mine. That's been part of my process, and I genuinely hope that, you know, she has the love and support as she walks her own process, and then and then she can tell us about something about the world because of what she's experienced.
Well, I don't know if this is a question or more a statement, but as a parent of kids of your generation, it's just none of my damn business what they do, period. None of my business at all. All I can do is love them and accept them, and if I do anything more than that, or to the side of that, I'm screwing them up, I'm hurting them. So what amazes me is that you hear about the melting pot, you hear about the watering down of our culture, and you worry about it. And although I wasn't born here, I kind of came over watered down. You know, I thought it was French, it was like this Lebanese thing, you know, I was just not enough at all. Even though I'm not like split, you know, both my parents are Arab. But what I see here in this group is it kind of like maybe it skipped a generation or two, and it's become, the Arab has become distilled and stronger. And that's what I learned from you as you navigate, you know, with the constellations or whatever, with your bodies. And I just want to honor you. And next year we'll have a bigger art show, okay, I promise. It won't just be us. I don't really have a question, but I just want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doris.
And I actually have one, if everyone can indulge me. So, growing up, I think I'm maybe a couple years older than you, but growing up in the post 9/11 world, I felt like it was so hard to accept the Arab part of me, even though both of my parents immigrated here from Lebanon. My dad's side is from Haifa, my mom's from Gaza, but it just felt so hard to accept who I was, and I feel hopeful talking and hearing you speak. How did you find that confidence? Because it took me 20 years to find that confidence. So how?
I know I'm the moderator, but I joined the House of Palestine when I was 14 years old. And I was always told to be very careful by my father to not let people know that we spoke Arabic at home. Those like the forms when you go to school and you select like what language you speak at home, you'd say put English. They shouldn't know we're Palestinian, because he was very worried that I would be targeted. And watching my parents be afraid of my culture made me want to do the exact opposite. And I actively worked at that. And as I've gotten older, and the only reason I joined House of Palestine when I was 14 and not younger than that was because they didn't allow me to. And it was sheer persistence of me constantly asking that I was able to do that. And I think it purely comes from watching you from watching the older generation, from visiting Palestine, from watching my Sipti, and from seeing the experiences of the women of my culture and how strong that they have had to be. I have no right to be any less than that.
I have a very similar experience with, growing up post 9/11. I think I was 8 when 9/11 happened. I remember watching it on TV, waiting for my school bus to pick me up. And just the onslaught from students, the raised eyebrows from some teachers, people writing into the newspaper. Everyone was telling me to essentially be ashamed that I was Arab, to be ashamed that I was Muslim, to hide it, to keep it down. My parents told me to be careful, and they taught me how to read the room. And I learned a lot from watching how my dad would address our community, because he was one of the leading members of our little nomadic mosque that would meet in various basements of recreational buildings, because we didn't have a mosque. And I watched how diplomatic he would be. And I know that's a lot of work, and he shouldn't have had to, he shouldn't have to have been in that position, but I understand how the tensions were. And I would mimic that with my elementary school classmates and try to advocate and try to educate. And the more people would push against that and say, well, aren't they still bad? Or does your family support this? I would say no, and I would sort of double down in that, really wearing my identity on my sleeve. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not as white passing as my siblings, and so I really took ownership of that, especially in defiance of the people who wanted me to be ashamed or wanted me to hide it. I wanted everyone to know, at the first opportunity, I'm Egyptian, I'm Muslim, so that I could be a point that they could have a conversation with.
Yeah, I resonate with that too. I think for me and a lot of Jewish Arab young people, 9/11 was what made me realize that I was Arab, and then the subsequent Iraq War was what made me really realize I was Iraqi, because I was resonating and hearing these things being said about my family, and wanting to be a part of that and wanting to defend that. And I think that's kind of has just grown over time with me learning more about it and talking more about it.
I would just say coming into yourself and being with yourself is always a practice. It's ongoing. It's something that is going to be a lifelong thing. That's why we're still here, is because there's still more work to do. And to go, for me, confidence has come through comrades and come through love, and just, if you don't feel accepted or loved in a circumstance, maybe it's not for you, or maybe, if you have to be there for some reason, seek out other spaces where you're reflected back to you and where you're reflected with love and acceptance. And if you're not feeling it, trust that that's going to be somewhere else, because you deserve it. Everyone deserves that. So that's what I would just say, is go to the people who reflect you, even if they're not the same as you, who are willing to accept you and reflect you. Yeah, and find music, art, culture, food, things like that are great. Just listen to what you love too, and if you love it, then that's good enough.
Yeah, I think I understand every single person that's here and relate to it. And if you're nodding your head, which you are, you relate to it too. And I think having that relatability and that community, like Ahmed was saying, and people that care about you and validate you, and having that validation yourself, it's always a struggle. Every single one of us has struggled with am I Arab enough? Am I this enough, or whatever? And I mean, I'm not even gonna get into 9/11 because that's a whole another thing. I didn't even grow up here, and it's still affected me. Over there, it's oh, a celebration, and then over here, it's you're a terrorist. So it's this whole thing. But ultimately, 9/11, but being here, and Emma said, really clinging on to, and Yasmin was saying, clinging on to the culture and those things that make sense to us, and then leaving behind and evolving and changing the cultural norms and things that don't serve us or like don't serve our community anymore is like important. So as long as like it's always going to be a push and pull, and there's always going to be like, am I like enough? But like ultimately, like you are, you know. Like, I get told all the time, you don't look like a Saudi woman, but I'm like, I am, so I don't know what you're looking at, I don't know what you're trying to say, so, you know, if anyone, are you Arab? Well, I am, so there you go.
Yeah, and the confidence, the lack of confidence, like, there's a reason we don't love ourselves or we're not confident is because we were made to feel that way. And that was a political choice to, like, take power, you know what I'm saying? And so recognizing it's not our fault, and yeah, it's not like, you know, it's not your fault, basically.
Perfect. If there are not any more questions, yeah.
So we actually do have to start to wrap it.
Please approach us
We'll
and
get maybe one more question, but then we do have to wrap it up.
Okay, I'll be quick. Thank you so much for your passionate and self-reflective sharing of your experiences. Thank you so much. I have a question for Skyland. Beautiful name, Skyland. Okay, got it. How do you feel about the constant Zionist attempts to co-opt the Arab-Jewish experience towards their, you know, Zionist, hegemonic Zionist narrative? And the other part related to this is, are you familiar with Professor Shai, I forgot his last name, I'll get it. He wrote a book on, actually I have it here, a book called Dear Palestine, very new one. It was just released. I don't know, because in that, he actually does, let me see, Shai Haskani, and he's Jewish himself, of course. He wrote a lot about actually, you know, the Zionist attempts, you know, to get all the Jewish Arab communities out of Arab countries to immigrate into Israel and to actually have them believe in the Zionist idea, etc. But then he talks about something that nobody knows about, which is the people who went back after fighting with the Zionists and the discrimination and racism they faced. It's a fascinating new book. I don't know if you heard about it or not, but those things, you know, like co-opting the Arab-Jewish experience. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I'd love to read it. I was actually going to ask you a similar question during the ethnic studies panel, how these Zionist organizations have co-opted the Mizrahi Arab Jewish experience in their attempts to, you know, get rid of the Arab American part of the ethnic studies curriculum. Yeah, I feel like for me, it's a part of my relearning and remembering my Arab Jewish identity is recognizing the like Zionism as the culprit for a lot of what I feel and a lot of the inability to be who I am, and that co-opting that, like, I mean, I just growing up, just this Zionist narrative is everywhere, you know, like the idea of this one Jewish people, this like Western Jewish people, that's just, I grew up with that everywhere, always having to kind of like push against that and to resurface that, no, this is not true. There are other narratives. It's more complex to that, and so yeah, I think it's frustrating and it's like exhausting. Yeah.
Shukran jiddan ya jama'a. Thank you so much. I'm sure we would all love to continue answering your questions and speaking with you. And we'll do that in about we'll make a WhatsApp group. Yeah.